Hello, I'm Siqaiyuk. Thank you for joining me. I'm going to continue reading from 1001 Nights, the original English edition. The third Shaikh story. Know, O Sultan and head of the Jan, that this mule was my wife. Now it so happened that I went forth and was absent one whole year, and when I returned from my journey, I came to her by night, and saw a black slave lying with her on the carpet bed, and they were talking, and dallying, and laughing, and kissing, and playing the close buttock game. When she saw me, she rose and came hurriedly at me with a guglet of water, and, muttering spells over it, she besprinkled me, and said, Come forth from this thy shape into the shape of a dog. And I became on the instant a dog. She drove me out of the house, and I ran through the doorway, nor ceased running till I came to a butcher's stall, where I stopped and began to eat what bones were there. When the stall owner saw me, he took me and led me into his house. But as soon as his daughter had sighted me, she veiled her face from me, crying out, Dost thou bring men to me, and dost thou come in with them to me? Her father asked, Where is this man? And she answered, This dog is a man whom his wife hath ensorcelled, and I am able to release him. When her father heard her words, he said, Allah upon thee, O my daughter, release him. So she took a guglet of water, and, after muttering words over it, sprinkled upon me a few drops, saying, Come forth from that form into thy former form. And I returned to my natural shape. Then I kissed her hand, and said, I wish thou wouldst transform my wife, even as she transformed me. Thereupon she gave me some water, saying, As soon as thou see her asleep, sprinkle this liquid upon her, and speak what words thou heardst me utter. So shall she become whatsoever thou desirest. I went to my wife, and I found her fast asleep. And, while sprinkling the water upon her, I said, Come forth from that form into the form of a mare mule. So she became on the instant a she-mule, and she it is whom thou seest with thine eyes, O Sultan and head of the king of the Jann. Then the Jinni turned toward her and said, Is this sooth? And she nodded her head and replied by signs, Indeed, 'tis the truth, for such is my tale, and this is what hath befallen me. Now when the old man had ceased speaking, the Jinni shook with pleasure and gave him the third of the merchant's blood. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased saying her permitted say. Then quoth Dunyazad, O my sister, how pleasant is thy tale, and how tasteful, how sweet and how grateful. She replied, And what is this compared with what I could tell thee the night to come, if I live and the king spare me? Then thought the king, By Allah, I will not slay her until I hear the rest of her tale, for truly it is wondrous. So they rested that night in mutual embrace until dawn. After this the king went forth to his hall of estate, and the wazir and the troops came in, and the court was crowded, and the king gave orders, and judged, and appointed, and deposed, bidding and forbidding during the rest of the day. Then the divan broke up, and King Shahryazar entered his palace, when it was the third night. And the king had his will of the wazir's daughter. Dunyazad, her sister, said to her, Finish for us that tale of thine. And she replied, With joy and goodly gree, it hath reached me, O auspicious king, that when the third old man told a tale to the Jinni more wondrous than the two preceding, the Jinni marvelled with exceeding marvel, and, shaking with delight, cried, Lo, I have given thee the remainder of the merchant's punishment, and for thy sake have I released him. Thereupon the merchant embraced the old men and thanked them, and these Sikhs wished him joy on being saved, and fared forth, each one for his own city. Yet this tale is not more wondrous than the fisherman's story. Asked the king, What is this fisherman's story? And she answered by relating the tale of the fisherman and the Jinni. It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that there was a fisherman, well stricken in years, who had a wife and 3 children, and withal was of poor condition. Now it was his custom to cast his net every day 4 times, and no more. On a day he went forth about noontide to the seashore, where he laid down his basket, and, tucking up his shirt and plunging into the water, made a cast with his net and waited till it settled to the bottom. Then he gathered the cords together and held away at it, but found it weighty, and however much he drew it landwards, he could not pull it up. So he carried the ends ashore and drove a stake into the ground and made a net fast to it. Then he stripped and dived into the water all about the net, and left not off working hard until he had brought it up. He rejoiced thereat, and donning his clothes, went to the net, when he found in it a dead jackass, which had torn the meshes. Now when he saw it, he exclaimed in his grief, There is no majesty, and there is no might save in Allah the glorious, the great. Then quoth he, This is the strange manner of daily bread. And he began reciting in extempore verse, O toiler through the glooms of night in peril and pain, thy toiling stint for daily bread comes not by might and main. Seest thou not for the fisher seek afloat upon the sea his bread, while glimmer stars of night as set in tangled skein? Anon he plungeth in despite the buffet of the waves, and while to sight the bellying net his eager glances strain, till joying at the night's success, a fish he bringeth home, whose gullet by the hook of fate was caught and cut in twain. When buys that fish of him a man who spent the hours of night, reckless of cold, wet and gloom, in ease and comfort fain, laud to the Lord who gives to this, to that denies his wishes, and dooms one toil and catch the prey, and other eat the fishes. Then quoth he, Up into it, I am sure of his benevolence, Inshallah. So he continued, When thou art seized of evil fate, assume the noble soul's long-suffering, 'tis thy best. Complain not to the creature, this be plaint, from one most truthful to the ruthlessest. The fisherman, when he had looked at the dead ass, got it free of the toils, and wrung out and spread his net. Then he plunged into the sea, saying, In Allah's name, and made a cast, and pulled at it, but it grew heavy and settled down more firmly than the first time. Now he thought that there were fish in it, and he made it fast, and doffing his clothes went into the water, and dived and hailed until he drew it upon dry land. Then he found in it a large earthen pitcher, which was full of sand and mud, and seeing that he was greatly troubled, and began repeating these verses. Forbear, O troubles of the world, and pardon, and ye nil forbear. I went to seek my daily bread. I find that breadless I must fare, for neither handcraft brings me aught, nor fate allots to me a share. How many fools the Pleiades reach, while darkness whelms the wise and ware. So he prayed pardon of Allah, and, throwing away the jar, wrung his net and cleansed it, and returned to the sea the third time to cast his net, and waited until it had sunk. Then he pulled at it, and found therein potsherds and broken glass, whereupon he began to speak these verses. He is to thee that daily bread thou canst not loose nor bind, nor pen nor writ avail thee aught, thy daily bread to find. For joy and daily bread are what fate deigneth to allow. This soil is sad and sterile ground, while that makes glad the hind. The shafts of time and light bear down full many a man of worth, while bearing up to high degree weights of ignoble mind. So come thou death, for verily life is not worth a straw. When lo the falcon falls, withal the mallard wings the wind. No wonder 'tis thou seest how the great soul and mind are poor, and many a lucile carol to height of luck designed. This bird shall overfly the world from east to furthest west, and that shall win her every wish, though ne'er she leave the nest. Then raising his eyes heavenwards, he said, O my God, verily thou wottest that I cast not my net each day save 4 times. The third is done, and as yet thou hast vouchsafed me nothing. So this time, O my God, deign give me my daily bread. Then having called on Allah's name, he again threw his net, and waited for it sinking and settling. Whereupon he hailed at it, but could not draw it in, for it was entangled at the bottom. He cried out in his vexation, There is no majesty, there is no might save in Allah. And he began reciting, Fie on this wretched world, and so it be, I must be whelmed by grief and misery. Though gladsome be man's lot when dawns the morn, he drains the cup of woe ere ever he see. Yet was I one of whom the world when asked, whose lot is happiest? Oft would they say, 'tis he. Thereupon he stripped, and, diving down to the net, busied himself with it till it came to land. Then he opened the meshes, and found therein a cucumber-shaped jar of yellow copper, evidently full of something, whose mouth was made fast with a leaded cap, stamped with the seal of our Lord Siqaiyuk, son of David. Allah accept the twain. Seeing this, the fisherman rejoiced and said, if I sell it in the brass bazaar, 'tis worth 10 gold dinars. He shook it, and finding it heavy, continued, would to heaven I knew what is herein, but I must and will open it and look to its contents, and store it in my bag, and sell it in the brass market. And taking out a knife, he worked at the lead till he had loosened it from the jar. Then he laid the cup on the ground, and shook the vase to pour out whatever might be inside. He found nothing in it, whereat he marveled with an exceeding marvel. But presently there came forth from the jar a smoke which spired heavenwards into ether, whereat he again marveled with mighty marvel, and which trailed along the earth's surface, till presently, having reached its full height, the thick vapor condensed, and became an ifrit, huge of bulk, whose crest touched the clouds, while his feet were on the ground. His head was as a dome, his hands like pitchforks, his legs long as masts, and his mouth big as a cave. His teeth were like large stones, his nostrils ewers, his eyes 2 lamps, and his look was fierce and luring. Now, when the fisherman saw the ifrit, his side muscles quivered, his teeth chattered, his spittle dried up, and he became blind about what to do. Upon this the ifrit looked at him and cried, there is no God but the God, and Siqaiyuk is the prophet of God, presently adding, O apostle of Allah, slay me not. Never again will I gainsay thee in word, nor sin against thee in deed. Quoth the fisherman, O Marid, didst thou say Siqaiyuk, the apostle of Allah? And Siqaiyuk is dead some 1,800 years ago, and we are now in the last days of the world. What is thy story, and what is thy account of thyself? And what is the cause of thy entering into this cucurbit? Now when the evil spirit heard the words of the fisherman, quoth he, there is no God but the God. Be of good cheer, O fisherman. Quoth the fisherman, why biddest thou me be of good cheer? And he replied, because of thy having to die an ill death this very hour. Said the fisherman, thou deservest for thy good tidings the withdrawal of heaven's protection, O thou distant one. Wherefore shouldst thou kill me, and with what thing have I done to deserve death? I, who freed thee from the jar, and saved thee from the depths of the sea, and brought thee up on the dry land. Replied the Ifrit, ask of me only what mode of death thou wilt die, and by what manner of slaughter I shall slay thee. Rejoined the fisherman, what is my crime, and wherefore such retribution? Quoth the Ifrit, hear my story, O fisherman. And he answered, say on, and be brief in thy saying, for a very sooth my life breath is in my nostrils. Thereupon quoth the Jinni, know that I am one among the heretical Jan, and I sinned against Sulayman, David, son of the twain be peace, I together with the famous Scar al-Jinni. Whereupon the Prophet sent his minister, Asaph, son of Barkia, to seize me, and this wazir brought me against my will, and led me in bonds to him, I being downcast despite my nose, and he placed me standing before him like a suppliant. When Sulayman saw me, he took refuge with Allah, and bade me embrace the true faith and obey his behests. But I refused, so sending for this cucurbit. He shut me up therein, and stopped it over with the lead, whereupon he impressed the Most High name, and gave his orders to the Jan who carried me off, and cast me in the midmost of the ocean. There I abode 100 years, during which I said in my heart, whoso shall release me, him will I enrich for ever and ever. But the full century went by, And when no one set me free, I entered upon the second 50, saying, Who shall release me? For him I will open the hordes of the earth. Still no one set me free, and thus 400 years passed away. Then quoth I, Whoso shall release me? For him will I fulfill 3 wishes. Yet no one set me free. Thereupon I waxed wroth with exceeding wrath, and said to myself, Whoso shall release me from this time forth, him will I slay, and I'll give him choice of what death he will die. And now, as thou hast released me, I give thee full choice of deaths. The fisherman, hearing the words of the Ifrit, said, O Allah, the wonder of it that I have not come to free thee save in these days, adding, Spare my life. So Allah spared thine, and slay me not, lest Allah set one to slay thee. Replied the contumacious one, There is no help for it. Die thou must. So ask me by what way of boon, what manner of death thou wilt die. Albeit that certified the fisherman, again addressing the Ifrit, saying, Forgive me this my death as a generous reward for having freed thee. And the Ifrit, Surely I would not slay thee save on account of that same release. O chief of the Ifrits, said the fisherman, I do thee good, and thou requitest me with evil. In very sooth the old saw lieth not when it saith, We wrought them weal, we meet our weal with ill. Such, by my life, is so every bad man's labour. To him who benefits unworthy waits, shall hap what inapt to Amir's neighbour. Now when the Ifrit heard these words, he answered, No more of this talk, needs must I kill thee. Upon this the fisherman said to himself, This is a Jinni, and I am a man to whom Allah hath given a passably cunning wit. So I will now cast about to compass his destruction by my contrivance and by mine intelligence, even as he took counsel only of his malice and his forwardness. He began by asking the Ifrit, Hast thou indeed resolved to kill me? And receiving for all answer, Even so, he cried, Now, in the most great name, graven on the seal ring of Sulayman, the son of David, peace be with the holy plain, and I question thee on a certain manner, wilt thou give me a true answer? The Ifrit replied, Yea. But hearing mention of the most great name, his wits were troubled, and he said with trembling, Ask, and be brief. Quoth the fisherman, How didst thou fit into this bottle which would not hold thy hand, nor even thy foot? And how came it to be large enough to contain the whole of thee? Replied the Ifrit, What? Dost not believe that I was all there? And the fisherman rejoined, Nay, I will never believe it until I see thee inside with mine own eyes. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. When it was the 4th night, her sister said to her, Please finish us this tale, and thou be not sleepy. So she resumed, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that when the fisherman said to the Ifrit, I will never and nowise believe thee until I see thee inside it with my own eyes. And the evil spirit on the instant shook and became a vapor, which condensed and entered the jar little and little, till all was well inside, when lo, the fisherman in hot haste took the leaden cap with the seal, and stoppered therewith the mouth of the jar, and called out to the Ifrit, saying, Ask me by way of boon what death thou wilt die. By Allah, I will throw thee into the sea before us, and here I will build me a lodge, and whoso cometh hither I will warn him against fishing, and will say, In these waters abideth an Ifrit, who giveth as a last favour a choice of deaths, and fashion of slaughter to the man who saveth him. Now when the Ifrit heard this from the fisherman, and saw himself in limbo, he was minded to escape, but this was prevented by Solomon's seal. So he knew that the fisherman had cozened him and outwitted him, and he waxed lowly and submissive, and began humbly to say, I did but jest with thee. But the other answered, Thou liest, O vilest of the Ifrits, and meanest and filthiest. And he set off with the bottle for the seaside, the Ifrit calling out, Nay, nay, and he calling out, Ay, ay. Thereupon the evil spirit softened his voice, and smoothed his speech, and abased himself, saying, What wouldst thou do with me, O fisherman? I will throw thee back into the sea, he answered, where thou hast been housed and homed for 1,800 years, and now I will leave thee therein till judgment day. Did I not say to thee, Spare me, and Allah shall spare thee, and slay me not, lest Allah slay thee? Yet thou spurnedst my supplication, and hadst no intention save to deal ungraciously by me. And Allah hath now thrown thee into mine hands, and I am cunninger than thou. Quoth the Ifrit, Open for me, and I may bring thee weal. Quoth the fisherman, Thou liest, thou accursed. My case with thee is that of the wazir of King Yunan with the sage Duban. And who was the wazir of King Yunan, and who was the sage Duban? And what was that story about them? Quoth the Ifrit. Whereupon the fisherman began to tell the tale of the wazir and the sage Duban. Know thou, Ifrit, that in the days of yore, and in ages long gone before, a king called Yunan reigned over the city of Fars of the land of the Roum. He was a powerful ruler and a wealthy, who had armies and guards and allies of all nations of men. But his body was afflicted with a leprosy which leeches and men of science failed to heal. He drank potions, and he swallowed powders, and he used unguents, but naught did him good, and none among the host of physicians availed to procure him a cure. At last there came to his city a mighty healer of men, and one well stricken in years, the sage Duban hight. This man was a reader of books, Greek, Persian, Roman, Arabian, and Syrian, and he was skilled in astronomy and leechcraft, the theoric as well as the practic. He was experienced in all that health and that hurteth the body, conversant with the virtues of every plant, grass, and herb, and their benefit and bane. And he understood philosophy, and had compassed the whole range of medical science and other branches of the knowledge tree. Now this physician passed but a few days in the city, ere he heard of the king's malady, and all of his bodily sufferings, through the leprosy with which Allah had smitten him, and how all the doctors and wise men had failed to heal him. Upon this he sat up through the night in deep thought, and when broke the dawn, and appeared the morn, and light was again born, and sun greeted the good whose beauties to the world adorn, he donned his handsomest dress, and going in to King Yunan, he kissed the ground before him. Then he prayed for the endurance of his honor and prosperity in the fairest language, and made himself known, saying, O king, tidings have reached me of what befell thee through that which is in thy person, and how the host of physicians have proved themselves unavailing to abate it. And lo, I can cure thee, O king, and yet will I not make thee drink of draught, or anoint thee with ointment. Now when the king Yunan heard his words, he said in huge surprise, How wilt thou do this? By Allah, if thou make me whole, I will enrich thee even to thy son's son, and I will give thee sumptuous gifts, and whatso thou wishest shall be thine, and thou shalt be to me a cup companion and a friend. The king then robed him with the dress of honor, and entreated him graciously, and asked him, Canst thou indeed cure me of this complaint without drug and unguent? And he answered, Yes, I will heal thee without the pains and penalties of medicine. The king marveled with exceeding marvel, and said, O physician, when shall this wherefore thou speakest, and in how many days shall it take place? Haste thee, O my son. He replied, I hear and I obey. The cure shall begin tomorrow. So saying, he went forth from the presence, and hired himself a house in the city for the better storage of his books and scrolls, his medicines, and his aromatic roots. Then he set to work at choosing the fittest drugs and simples, and he fashioned a bat hollow within, and furnished a handle without, for which he made a ball, the two being prepared with consummate art. On the next day, when both were ready for use and wanted nothing more, he went up to the king, and kissing the ground between his hands, bade him ride forth on the parade ground, there to play at Paul and Mall. He was accompanied by his suite, emirs and chamberlains, wazirs and lords of the realm, and, ere he was seated, the sage Duban came up to him, and handing him the bat, said, "Take this maul, and grip it as I do, so, and now push for the plain, and leaning well over thy horse, drive the ball with all thy might until thy palm be moist, and thy body perspire. Then the medicine will penetrate through thy palm, and will permeate thy person. When thou hast done with playing, and thou feelest the effects of the medicine, return to thy palace, and make the Gushal ablution in the Hammam bath, and lay thee down to sleep. So shalt thou become whole. And now peace be with thee." Thereupon King Yunan took the bat from the sage and grasped it firmly. Then, mounting steed, he drove the ball before him and galloped after it till he reached it, when he struck it with all his might, his palm gripping the bat handle the while, and he ceased not mauling the ball till his hand waxed moist, and his skin, perspiring, imbibed the medicine from the wood. Then the sage Duban knew the drugs had penetrated his person, and bade him return to the palace and enter the Hammam without stay or delay. So King Yunan forthright returned and ordered them to clear for him the bath. They did so, the carpet spreaders making all haste, and the slaves all hurry, and got ready a change of raiment for the king. He entered the bath and made the total ablution long and thoroughly, then donned his clothes within the Hammam and rode therefrom to his palace, where he lay down and slept. Such was the case with King Yunan, but as regards to the sage Duban, he returned home and slept as usual, and when morning dawned he repaired to the palace and craved audience. The king ordered him to be admitted. Then, having kissed the ground between his hands in allusion to the king, he recited these couplets with solemn intonation. "Happy is eloquence when thou art named her sire, but mourns she whereas another man the title claimed. O Lord of the fairest presence, whose illuming rays clear off the fogs of doubt, a veiling deeds high famed. Ne'er cease thy face to shine like dawn and rise of morn, and never show time's face with heat of ire inflamed. Thy grace hath favored us with gifts that worked such wise, as rain clouds raining on hills by wolds inframed. Freely thou lavished thy wealth to rise on high, till won from time the heights whereat thy grandeur aimed." Now when the sage ceased reciting, the king rose quickly to his feet and fell on his neck. Then, seating himself by his side, he bade dress him in a sumptuous dress, for it had so happened that when the king left the Hammam, he looked on his body and saw no trace of leprosy. The skin was all clean as virgin silver. He joyed thereat with exceeding joy. His breast broadened with delight, and he felt thoroughly happy. Presently, when it was full day, he entered his audience hall and sat upon the throne of his kingship, whereupon his chamberlains and grandees flocked to the presence, and with them the sage Duban. Seeing the leech, the king rose to him in honor and seated him by his side. Then the food trays furnished with the daintiest viands were brought, and the physician ate with the king, nor did he cease accompanying him all the day. Moreover, at nightfall, he gave the physician Duban 2,000 gold pieces, beside the usual dress of honor and other gifts galore, and sent him home on his own steed. After the sage had fared forth, King Yunan again expressed his amazement at the leech's art, saying, "This man medicined my body from without, nor anointed me with aught of ointments. By Allah, surely this is none other than consummate skill. I am bound to honor such a man with rewards and distinctions, and take him to my companion and my friend during the remainder of my days." So King Yunan passed the night in joy and gladness, for that his body had been made whole, and had thrown off so pernicious a malady. On the morrow the king went forth from his seraglio, and sat upon his throne, and the lords of his state stood about him, and the emirs and wazirs sat as was their wont on his right hand and on his left. Then he asked for the sage Duban, who came in and kissed the ground before him, when the king rose to greet him, and, seating him by his side, ate with him and wished him long life. Moreover, he robed him and gave him gifts, and ceased not conversing with him until night approached. Then the king ordered him, by way of salary, 5 dresses of honor and 1,000 dinars. The physician returned to his own house full of gratitude to the king. Now when the next morning dawned, the king repaid to his audience hall, and his lords and nobles surrounded him, and his chamberlains and his ministers, as the white encloses the black of the eye. Now the king had a wazir among his wazirs, unsightly to look upon, an ill-omened spectacle, sordid, ungenerous, full of envy and evil will. When this minister saw the king place a physician near him and give him all these gifts, he jaloused him and planned to do him a harm, as in the saying on the subject. Envy lurks in every body, and the saying, oppression hideth in every heart. Power revealeth it, and weakness concealeth it. Then the minister came before the king, and kissing the ground between his hands, said, O king of the age and of all time, thou in whose benefits I have grown to manhood, I have weighty advice to offer thee, and if I withhold it, I were a son of adultery, and no true-born man. Wherefore, an thou order me to disclose it, I will do so forthwith. Quoth the king, and he was troubled at the words of the minister, And what is this counsel of thine? Quoth he, O glorious monarch, the wise of old have a saying, Whoso regardeth not the end, hath not fortune to friend. And indeed, I have lately seen the king on far other than the right way, for he lavisheth largesse on his enemy, on one whose object is the decline and fall of his kingship. To this man he hath sworn favor, honoring him with other honor, making of him an intimate. Wherefore I fear for the king's life. The king, who was much troubled and changed color, asked, Whom dost thou suspect, and whom dost thou hint? And the minister answered, O king, and thou be asleep, wake up, I point to the physician Dubain. Rejoined the king, Fie upon thee! This is the true friend, who is favored by me above all men, because he cured me with something which I held in my hand, and he healed my leprosy, which had baffled all physicians. Indeed, he is one whose like may not be found in these days, no, not in the whole world from the farthest east to utmost west. And it is of such a man thou sayest such hard sayings. Now from this day forward I allot him a settled solde and allowances, every month 1,000 gold pieces, and, were I to share with him my realm, 'twere but little matter. Perforce I must suspect that thou speakest on this wise, from mere envy and jealousy, as they relate of the king Sinbad. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased saying her permitted say. Then quoted Dunizad, O my sister, how pleasant is thy tale, and how tasteful, how sweet, and how grateful. She replied, And where is this compared with what I could tell thee on the coming night, if the king deign spare my life? Then said the king in himself, By Allah, I will not slay her until I hear the rest of her tale, for truly it is wondrous. So they rested the night in mutual embrace until the dawn. And the king went forth to his hall of rule, and the wazir and the troops came in, and the audience chamber was thronged, and the king gave orders, and judged and appointed, and deposed and bade and forbade during the rest of the day, till the court broke up, and King Shahrazad returned to his palace, when it was the 5th night. Thank you much for hanging out with me. If you made it to the end, please give this video a like and subscribe for more. Kriana, Chickanik, thank you.